Welcome to Apple Teeny, where Apple workflow wizardry meets design drama and some very weird AI flexes. This episode has everything. A podcast that basically edits itself, AI agents running your inbox, and Apple somehow making app icons feel like a subscription. Also, Siri got blobbier, and Apple leadership gossip is fully in its prestige drama era. The production setup here is honestly catnip for anyone who's ever lost an afternoon to export hell. The key trick is AAF, which is basically an XML map of every edit in Logic, cuts, fades, mutes, the whole timeline story. That gets passed into Final Cut Pro through a custom Mac app, and suddenly you've got pre-edited video, lower thirds, intro and outro music, and even a timestamped transcript that links out to Apple Podcasts. At that point, the job is almost embarrassingly small. Quick trim, type in the title, done. Roughly 95% automated is the kind of number that makes you look at every manual workflow in your life with personal disappointment. A lot of AI agent demos still feel like somebody proudly showing you a Roomba trapped under a chair. This stack sounds a lot more real. T3 Code has an inbox-style interface for coding agents, with thread settlement, reminders and model pickers that apparently beat Cloud Code's Mac UI on speed and usability. Then T3 Connect uses Cloudflare tunnels to relay between your Mac and iPhone or other machines without turning setup into a weekend project. That free universal platform angle is smart, because half the battle with agent tools is getting them to stop acting like they live in one weird little sandbox. The bigger move is orchestration. A main Codex agent is pulling daily reminders, email triage, and Notion project pages into one dashboard, and if it doesn't know something, it can query Notion in real time. That source of truth idea is the good version of AI productivity. Less fake assistant, more competent chief of staff. The research pipeline is another fun one because it is built around a very modern problem. The internet is full of garbage. Services like Parallel.ai and Funnel get combined with custom markdown scrapers and multi-pass filtering to strip out SEO mush, affiliate spam, and bad sourcing. Then it cross-checks the survivors. A test query about upcoming iOS features reportedly surfaced obscure OS changes by triangulating Apple preview pages, Reddit, and social posts, which is exactly the kind of result normal search is weirdly bad at now. The voice tools are turning into a battle between pretty interfaces and actual usefulness. Whisperflow sounds strong because it's cross-platform, fast, customizable, and has dynamic island shortcuts, which matters when you want capture to be frictionless instead of ceremonial. Monologue goes harder on the Apple angle, with a watch complication and deeper CLI and webhook integrations, so if your life is already built out of Apple automations, that makes sense fast. Aqua Voice looks polished and has its own Avalon model, but if it lacks action button integrations, that's not a tiny omission. That's the kind of thing that decides whether you use it in real life or just admire it in screenshots. And then there's the connector problem. GPT Live Voice can't call third-party services like Superhuman, so it hits a wall right when you want it to do grown-up tasks. Codex Voice does support connectors, which means spoken commands can actually manage threads, launch browsers, and reach outside the app. That's a huge difference. Superhuman splits are one of those features that sound small until you picture your inbox behaving for once. AI-generated tags can auto-label incoming mail and group it into tabs at the top so you can bulk archive or block in seconds. That is a much nicer answer to inbox overload than the classic strategy of pretending none of it is happening. Because Superhuman works over the cloud and integrates with ChatGPT work, you can also do absurdly fast voice-prompted searches, like digging up a 4-year-old PDF for your accountant without reenacting an archaeological dig. It also makes the connector gap more obvious. If your AI voice mode can't reach cloud services, your automation story is suddenly very inspirational and not very useful. Now for the part where Apple starts sounding like a company with a group chat problem. Alan Dye left for Meta after secret negotiations, and insiders think there was a personality clash with John Turnus. Dye's team was apparently dismissed by some people as magazine designers, which is the kind of insult that lands extra hard inside a design org. There were also rumors, a full year before the public announcement, that Tim Cook intended to step down and Turnus would be the successor, with senior leadership supposedly already aware through Monday meetings. Some sources think Dye jumped before he could be pushed, and that his exit hurt morale among designers who stayed. Even if you strip out the rumor fog, the vibe is clear. Politics inside Apple design are not exactly calming anybody down. The deeper complaint is that too many UI decisions are being driven by internal politics instead of clean design judgment. And honestly, a lot of users have felt that without needing the inside baseball. People interviewed point to the shift from Steve Jobs' design-first, hands-on culture to Tim Cook's looser approach as the moment the unified vision started thinning out. Then you get the iOS-first mindset, where things are designed on iPhone and ported later, and macOS starts feeling like it borrowed somebody else's clothes. System settings is the obvious example, but the criticism gets more specific. iPad's key window problem, weaker active window cues, and a general loss of desktop clarity. When longtime Mac users say something feels vaguely wrong, this is the kind of stuff they mean. The liquid glass icon pipeline is one of those ideas that sounds elegant right up until you imagine maintaining it. Apple now applies highlights and shading to every icon at runtime through a rendering formula, which creates a more uniform look across iOS and macOS. Fine, nice, very glossy. But if that formula changes every year, developers basically have to revisit their icons every year too, because what looked right in one release can look off in the next. For big companies, that's annoying. For indie developers, it's a real burden, and in some cases it can cost more attention than shipping actual features. Making visual consistency depend on annual icon upkeep is a very Apple solution in both the best and most exhausting sense. The Siri redesign is catching heat too, and I get it. In iOS 27, it's described as a blobby translucent bar that feels disconnected from everything around it and is harder to dismiss. None of that sounds like progress. On macOS, Siri also got inserted near the top of context menus, which critics say breaks muscle memory and clutters the menu stack. That's exactly the sort of tiny change that drives power users nuts all day long. Meanwhile, the MacBook Pro line is being called creatively stale, with generation after generation looking almost the same, except for tweaks like a darker space black finish. When software feels less coherent and hardware feels less daring, it's not shocking that some engineers start looking elsewhere for the fun part of the job. And finally, Apple is suing around trade secrets, alleging that more than 400 former employees moved to OpenAI and unlawfully accessed Apple's internal file-sharing system after leaving. One example in the complaint involves a former employee keeping an Apple laptop active for weeks after departure, which is exactly the sort of detail lawyers include because they know it sounds terrible. The case reads less like a simple money play and more like a deterrent plus a fishing expedition for broad discovery. Basically, Apple wants to know whether this was a few bad incidents or a systemic leak, and it wants everyone else watching to be extremely aware that it is asking. That's it for Apple Teeny. Today we learned your podcast can edit itself, your inbox might finally deserve respect, and Apple can turn even icons into office politics. Talk soon. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.